Some games, be it through corporate meddling or some other weird reasons, are just no longer available to play. So that's what we're talking about today. We got 10 games you can never play again. Let's get started off with number 10 and talk about the obvious. It's PT. We've talked about PT a million times at this point. You may know the drill. It was released as a playable teaser back in 2014. This was a legendary demo for an upcoming Silent Hills game that was apparently going to be like a PS4 exclusive. Now this little demo got a ton of attention and has been a major inspiration for a lot of horror games that came after it. But that didn't stop Konami from removing the game from PlayStation Network in April of 2015. You probably heard the history by now. Again, like I said, we've talked about it a lot on this channel, yada. So Silent Hills was cancelled, and with Kojima out of the company, what reason was there to keep this demo up? Now the only ones capable of still playing the game are the lucky few who managed to download the game while it was available and have kept their hard drives intact. There are plenty of games out there that have been delisted but are still playable in some shape or form, but this one is a lot tougher because it's a PSN exclusive. And while there's a PlayStation 4 emulator out there, it's an extreme work in progress. You're not going to get PT running on that software usually, especially for the layman. It's still possible to download the game if you owned it previously, but the process is actually tricky and awkward, and if you didn't download the game at any point, then you're just SOL or shit out of luck. Still, this game has seen many fan remakes and recreations over the years, so you don't necessarily have to have the game if you want to experience it yourself. It's just not going to be exactly the same as the original. Still, at the very least, maybe watch a YouTube video and see how cool it was. Put some headphones on, turn the lights off. Ooh, PT is still really spooky. Now over at number 9, we have the original Destiny 2 campaign. This one still pisses us off. Yeah, I've heard all of Bungie's excuses about the ballooning file size of the game, but you can still play the original story in Final Fantasy XIV. You can still play the old story in Elder Scrolls Online. Hell, you can even play the original version of World of Warcraft now. Those games are much bigger than anything in Destiny 2, but somehow there's just no way they can make the game work with the original campaign, and the first 3 DLCs give me a break. I don't think they're lying. From everything that we've heard, all the back end behind-the-scenes technical stuff for Destiny 2 is messy, but it still feels weird. Because we technically bought that campaign, we paid for that campaign, and now we can't get what we paid for. It's weird too, especially because a lot of the story of Destiny 2 still relies on that original campaign. It's what introduced new players to the universe, and now there's just nothing. The loss of the Red War makes an already confusing game even more impenetrable for new players. And because the game requires you to update it and it needs a constant internet connection to function, there's no way to go back and play the original campaign in any way. It's just gone for good, and while it wasn't the best first-person shooter story, it was still pretty fun, so I don't know, it sucks that you can't play it again. Next, over at number 8, Rumbleverse. Now this game suffered the same fate as so many other creative free-to-play battle royale games. It came out, got some attention for a little while, and then shut down only 6 months after its launch. Sometimes, rarely, these games give players the tools to keep playing them. Knockout City was another promising free-to-play game that shut down, but at least that game allowed people to host their own private servers, so it's at least still technically playable for that community that really loved it. When it comes to multiplayer games, technically playable is still playable because the alternative is that it's totally dead. It's a shame because Rumbleverse was actually a pretty fun alternative to your standard battle royale. It did something different and managed to get a small but passionate fan base. Now, with the servers closed and no alternative for fans to run the game locally, there's nothing left to do but look at old videos of the game to remind yourself of what it was. Rumbleverse is just one of so many other free-to-play online-only games that have shut down in the past few years, and it's just a shame, but there's no way to go back and play this one today, even if all I wanted to do was wander around an empty map. Still. Next, over at number 7, oh boy, on October 4th, 2022, Overwatch 2 launched and completely replaced Overwatch 1. If you want to go back and play the original Overwatch game now, it's impossible. There is no Overwatch 1, it's just Overwatch 2 with all its new and improved monetization systems. Players were at least able to carry over their profiles and all the costumes they had previously. But still, they forced the entire community to migrate over to the sequel. I've seen plenty of people make excuses about this decision, saying that the servers are expensive running 2 games at once with split the player base, that it's just extra work. For Blizzard, Activision Blizzard, the biggest company in the world. The thing is, Call of Duty games don't overwrite the old ones, you can still go back and play. Any old COD game you want, they're just not going to replace Black Ops Cold War when Black Ops 6 comes out, they will remain two separate games. The reality is that Overwatch 2 is mostly just a marketing stunt. It's been called Overwatch 1.5 at best, especially now with most of the game's original promised features cancelled or given up on. It's not that Overwatch 2 is worse, even though maybe it kind of is. Many features of the original game are kind of MIA, and many of the biggest changes are still divisive. The thing that really bothers us is that it completely just replaces the original. Would it really ruin the player base if that player base could just play the original 6v6 game mode once in a while, just fire it up for old time's sake? I don't know. Next over at number 6 is MAG. Oh my god. I love this one. I totally remember this one. This is an extremely ambitious PS3 multiplayer shooter that had war zones like no other. Dude, it could support up to 256 players in a single battle, which made for some of the most epic and chaotic matches we can really remember. There were smaller modes, but the real star of the show was Domination, where teams of 128 players battled for control of these gigantic maps. Sure, the game was a little buggy and there wasn't much content compared to your average Battlefield game, but the epic scale of the battles were really something to behold. A massive scale game needs a massive audience to succeed, which unfortunately the game never quite managed. The online servers were shut down in 2014, just a little over 4 years after the game came out. At least it got a good few years, but with the game being locked on PS3 and no servers to play on, it is dead. It wasn't the biggest game ever, but it was such a cool, unique experience compared to most other things we were seeing at the time. It's a shame that it can't be played anymore. Next over at number 5 we have Marvel Heroes. This action RPG created by former Diablo 2 devs came out at the perfect time. This massive multiplayer game gave players a huge selection of Marvel heroes to choose from, all who had their own unique abilities and skill trees. It was in general one of the better Diablo-likes of its time. There was only one problem with it. It was online only, so the clock was ticking. Like, it wasn't if the game would eventually be unplayable forever, it was a matter of when. This one was especially painful because by basically all metrics the game was still doing pretty well, but Disney decided to end its relationship with the developers and the game was shut down in November of 2017, only about 4 years after it first came out. Looking at it now, you might wonder what the big deal is. It looks like any other forgettable ARPG game, but the difference was in the design. It was just so much more fun to play than most other games of its type. All the heroes were given pretty interesting and unique powers, the loot was well designed, and there was a lot of stuff to keep players busy without making it feel like they were just wasting their time. It was a good game that just died before its time, and now with the studio behind it closed and the servers shut down, there's really no hope of it ever coming back. Now at number 4, the Infinity Blade series. The original Infinity Blade game was one of the first big crossover hits for mobile gaming. Kind of like a mix between Punch-Out and a fantasy dungeon crawler, the game managed to have fun touchscreen controls while having the presentation and visuals of a AAA game. It was a really novel thing at the time. There weren't a ton of games on phones yet, but this one really blew everything out of the water, even if it was kind of simple. Then the sequel was even bigger than the first, and the next one after that was even bigger. These are foundational games for the mobile market, but Epic still ended up giving up on them. All 3 games were delisted in December of 2018, with Epic releasing a statement that said that it has become increasingly difficult for our team to support the Infinity Blade series. Now you might be inclined to shake your head and understanding like, oh yeah, that's a reasonable excuse, but remember that the games were delisted in 2018, the same year that Fortnite's annual revenue was like $5.4 billion with AB. That's more than the GDP of a small nation, and they can't afford to support one of their most popular games. Really simple games, some of them not even requiring an internet connection. Obviously they could have kept supporting Infinity Blade if they wanted to, but they just didn't want to anymore. Maybe it was like the fact that it was a little bit of a collaboration with Apple in the early days. I don't know, these are the same guys who delisted their Unreal games, the games that put them on the map, the games that their freaking engine is named after. And apparently they're not important enough to keep online, they have to be delisted everywhere. Those games can at least be played offline, so they're still alive, but the Infinity Blade games are nearly impossible to get working anymore. There is a community out there who has done a good job of bringing them back. We'll show them on screen, shout out to them here if you're just curious, so look at some video. Game history, some people are trying to keep the dream alive. Now at number 3, when it comes to a game with user-created content, it's always a ticking time bomb when all that stuff is just going to disappear or be erased. At least if one of those games is on PC, then users can share and store their creations locally, but with a console game like Little Big Planet, once those servers go down, all that hard work usually goes up in smoke. Now if you don't know, the Little Big Planet games were all about player expression. There was a single-player mode, but the real meat of the game was going online and playing through user-created levels. These things could get incredibly complex, and the tools to make these things were pretty sophisticated. Some of the things players managed to do with the creation tools is legit incredible, but all that is gone now. It was bad with the older games, but Little Big Planet 3 was unceremoniously dumped after months of server issues. I suppose like the writing was on the walls with the servers becoming barely functional. But still, PlayStation could have given people a little bit of warning so they could at least go in and play through some of their favorite levels one more time before they were gone for good. Ugh, that was rough. Now down at number 2, Darkspore. This mostly forgotten about follow-up to Spore. Believe me, I forgot about it. It's not that notable, except for one thing, it did rely on a central server to function. There's absolutely no reason why this game couldn't be played offline. There's nothing about it that actually requires online to function. But it was the time, and in early 2016 EA pulled the plug on the game and it had been rendered completely unplayable. That's not even the first online-only game to get shut down by EA. Like I said, like another game, the RTS game Battleforge, was shut down for similar reasons in 2013. That game would still be dead today if not for a community effort to get the game running again. And it's actually possible to play Battleforge again if you really want to. But Darkspore? Nah, that game is completely dead. Now what's so infuriating about this isn't that Darkspore is some forgotten masterpiece. Because it's not, but there's just no reason for this. The fact that like EA refused to even release an offline patch to make it like a thing, it's just totally dead now, and it's frustrating because it's like a video game preservation and history thing. Even if it's not the best game ever, people made it and it was a point in gaming history. And we want to be able to at least access it somehow. Now down at number 1, The Crew. This game, developed by Reflections of Driver Fame and Ivory Tower, has exactly one thing going for it: the gigantic racing world, which is made up of the entire continental US. It's a theme park version of the United States, but like it's still absolutely massive with an impressive variety of cities and biomes to just drive through. There was a story mode that was like the usual bland stuff, but as an excuse to drive around in different cities, there was some fun to be had here. In general, The Crew 2 is a better game, but while that game's servers are still up, this one shut down on March 31st, 2024. This wasn't a free-to-play game, it was a full-priced release that was sold in stores. You still might have the box and a disc. Hell, there are like used game stores out there still selling The Crew, but the game isn't worth the plastic it's printed on because that disc is completely useless. What's even more painful about this all is that yet again, this is a game that should, I think, technically be playable offline. I mean, the Forza Horizon games have more online features than this game does, and yet they're playable offline. There was even rumors that The Crew had an offline option that was disabled for launch. So Ubisoft could have maybe made it so you could play this game, but simply chose not to. This is like another example of like a long-running line of anti-consumer practices in the gaming world. These are the types of things that the people running the website StopKillingGames.com are trying to stop, and we can't talk about all the games in this list that you can never play again without at least throwing a mention their way. Raw Scott and all the people over there are doing good work, and it all started because of The Crew. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to live in a world where games can remain accessible in some way, especially ones like this where there's really no reason why we can't play them anymore. But like I said, those are 10 games that you can never play again. It's definitely a learning lesson. Be aware, just know how things go down, not to be like a fearmonger or anything, but sometimes your digital games are just never safe. That's how it goes. But if there are other games out there that we neglected to mention, let us know. If there's one you miss in particular, definitely let us know. And if you just like talking games with us every day, click on the like button is all you gotta do. It really helps us out. And if you're new, maybe consider subscribing, hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But hey, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.